Imagine living thousands of years ago. There are no stores, no refrigerators, no bottles, and absolutely no one knows what alcohol is. One day, you're hungry and searching for food among the trees. Suddenly, you find a few fruits lying on the ground, fruits that are overly ripe, crushed, and giving off a strange smell. Logic says you probably shouldn't eat them, but then again, you're an early human, and you don't exactly have many options. So you eat a few of the fruits. A little while later, your body starts to feel warm. You feel less afraid, and even that annoying stick figure standing next to you suddenly seems surprisingly funny. Our ancestors' first encounter with alcohol may have looked something like this. But here's the strange part. Our relationship with alcohol began long before modern humans even existed. Around 10 million years ago, some of our distant ancestors began spending more time on the ground instead of staying in trees. As they searched for food, fallen and overripe fruits became part of their diet. Some of these fruits had naturally fermented and contained small amounts of alcohol. Genetic research suggests that around this time, a change occurred in one of our ancestors' enzymes, greatly improving their ability to break down ethanol. In other words, millions of years before the first alcoholic drink was intentionally made, our ancestors' bodies had already become somewhat prepared to deal with alcohol. But how does alcohol appear inside fruit in the first place? Yeasts are microscopic organisms that love sugar. When they land on fruit, they consume the sugar and produce alcohol and gas in return. So the first alcoholic drink didn't require a laboratory or a factory. It only needed three things: fruit or grain, some water, and a little time. Early humans probably encountered this process accidentally many times. Perhaps they collected fruit inside a stone container or an animal skin. A few days later, rainwater entered the container, and natural yeast began doing its work. When the humans returned, they found a strange-looking liquid with an unusual smell. One member of the group probably tasted it cautiously. A few minutes later, their behavior changed. The rest of the group probably reached two conclusions. First, the liquid didn't appear to be deadly. Second, maybe they should try it too. Of course, we don't know who the first person was to intentionally drink a fermented beverage. This discovery probably didn't happen only once, in only one place. Different human groups in different regions likely discovered natural fermentation independently. However, inside a cave located in present-day Israel, archaeologists found evidence that may point to the production of a beer-like drink around 13,000 years ago. At Raqefet Cave, traces of grain processing were discovered inside stone mortars. Researchers believe that the Natufian people may have used wheat and barley to produce a fermented drink. Even more interestingly, this drink probably wasn't made for an ordinary party. It may have been consumed during ceremonies and group gatherings. So thousands of years ago, humans didn't gather only to survive. Sometimes, they also came together for rituals, food, and perhaps to feel a little happier. This discovery is even more surprising for another reason. The evidence comes from a time before large-scale agriculture had fully developed. For a long time, researchers have debated whether humans first cultivated grain to make bread or to make drinks. We still don't have a definite answer. But the evidence suggests that fermented beverages may have been one of the motivations that encouraged humans to collect and eventually cultivate more grain. Now, let's move forward a few thousand years. Around 7,000 years BCE, people in Jiahu, China, were producing a much more complex drink. Chemical traces found inside pottery vessels suggest that this beverage was made from a mixture of rice, honey, and fruits such as hawthorn berries or grapes. So it wasn't exactly beer, not completely wine, and not much like any modern drink. It was more like a strange cooking experiment that somehow worked. Later, in the South Caucasus, pottery vessels dating to around 6,000 years BCE revealed evidence of grape wine production. From this point onward, humans were no longer simply waiting for fruit to ferment by accident. They had learned how to control the process. They selected the fruit, crushed it, placed it inside containers, and waited. Something that had once happened by accident had now become a skill. As the first villages and cities began to form, fermented beverages became increasingly important. In Mesopotamia, beer wasn't only used during celebrations. Ancient tablets show that grain and beer were sometimes included in workers' rations. In fact, some of humanity's earliest written records were related to accounting for food, grain, and beverages. Imagine spending thousands of years developing writing, only for one of the first recorded messages to be: this amount of beer was given to the workers. In ancient Egypt, bread and beer were also major parts of the daily diet. Small models of bakeries and breweries show that the production of bread and beer was closely connected. Of course, ancient beer was probably very different from the clear, fizzy drink we know today. It may have been thick, cloudy, and full of grain particles. Sometimes, people may even have used straws or filters to drink it. But why did alcohol become so popular across so many different cultures? Part of the answer lies in its effect on the brain. In certain amounts, alcohol can create feelings of relaxation, reduce fear and embarrassment, and make social interaction seem easier. For humans whose survival depended on cooperation, eating and drinking around a fire may have helped strengthen bonds between group members. Fermented drinks eventually became part of ceremonies, celebrations, mourning rituals, and social agreements. But the story wasn't only about happiness and celebration. The same substance that could bring a group together could also interfere with balance, judgment, and self-control. Arguments caused by drunkenness are probably almost as old as alcoholic drinks themselves. This raises an interesting question. If our bodies have been able to process alcohol for millions of years, why is excessive consumption still dangerous? Because being able to break down a substance does not mean we are immune to its effects. Our ancestors adapted to deal with the small amount of alcohol found in fermented fruit, not large quantities of strong drinks consumed in a short period of time. Fruit that had naturally fermented on the ground probably contained far less alcohol. But humans, as usual, weren't satisfied with what nature had given them. They improved fermentation methods, used more ingredients, and created stronger beverages. Basically, nature gave humans a slightly fermented fruit, and humans said, "Good, but can we make it stronger?" So humans did not invent alcohol. Alcohol existed in nature long before we did. What humans did was discover fermentation, learn how to repeat it, and eventually turn it into part of culture and civilization. Our relationship with alcohol began with fallen fruit beneath trees. It then entered caves and group ceremonies, traveled with agriculture into villages, and eventually found its way into cities, temples, and people's homes. We may never know who the first human to become drunk was. But when that person lost their balance and fell in front of the rest of the tribe, they probably taught humanity an important lesson. Some historical discoveries don't begin with a scientific experiment. Sometimes, they begin with eating a suspicious-looking fruit.